Okay, so let's look at a reading comprehension passage from CAT 2024 slot 3. We are going to be reading the passage in this video and we're going to be getting a better sense of understanding of what information are you supposed to take away from the passage after finishing reading it for the first time. So first two sentences kind of set the theme for the passage, but they do not exactly tell us what the author's opinion about the topic of discussion is or what scope is the passage going to be talking about, but it sets a vague platform in the sense that the author is going to be talking about dying of languages, and then he points out that the biggest reason that languages die out is when the physical communities, the actual communities which speak these languages, they get annihilated, they get destroyed. And the author gives us an opinion of North American tribes which were wiped out by colonists from Europe. And the author says that 75% of languages in these territories were completely forgotten because of this colonial genocide. And the author says that the same thing happened in Central and South America as well, but not to the same extent as it happened in North America. So this talks about killing of languages by killing of communities. Next paragraph begins with telling us that only killing of communities is not the reason. Sometimes what also happens is that the dominant languages of the ruling class, of the majority population, they tend to sideline native languages. They tend to not encourage the learning, discourage the learning also to a certain extent. And the author gives an example of how English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, Russian, and even Hindi for that matter, have led to a lot of local regional languages dying and perishing. Then in the next paragraph, the author begins by talking about what harm does it do when we lose a language? How is that detrimental to us and civilization and society? And the author says a lot of things are lost. A way of expressing thoughts in language, arts in that language like plays and prose and poetry, and the way that they used to describe their own native geographies and biospheres and plants and animals. All of those things get lost along with language. These are the disadvantages of language. Then the next paragraph begins with a very great sentence, which is an example of a sentence that we need to focus upon when we're reading the passage. Sentences that tell us where from has the passage been taken, who is the author of the passage. This gives us a very deep sense of insight about the purpose of writing the passage, about what kind of content is it that we're reading. And that's what happens at the beginning of the next paragraph here, as the author says that as educators deeply immersed in the liberal arts, we tells us that the author is one of the educators of liberal arts and what he believes is the value of learning liberal arts. Why does he teach liberal arts and how teaching about language and culture actually helps. He says one very, very big advantage is that sometimes individuals who learn liberal arts, they themselves become linguists and they travel to remote places. They learn the language, they learn the culture, and they record these languages in places where they can live on. So they directly contribute to the survival of languages. Then the next paragraph, he says that not everyone actually does this. Majority of students actually don't do this. But even then, even if students don't do this, being educated in the liberal arts leads to perspectives on language extinction. And it also builds global citizenship. That when people learn perspectives of other languages, it makes them aware of the biases of their own language. It helps them understand and empathize with other cultures and other societies. And it makes them less hostile towards cultures and perspectives which are not their own. So how it actually helps build global citizenship in the sense that it brings about the world together. And the last paragraph, the author ends with saying that how these kind of practices of wanting to preserve languages have actually helped. And there are examples of languages like Navajo, Cree, and Inuit communities that have established schools in which these languages are the language of instruction, and number of speakers have increased. So that's what the passage is about. So overall, the author is talking about languages, especially smaller native community languages, which are not very widely spoken, and what causes their deaths, and why preserving them is important, and how preserving them is supposed to happen, and what kind of value does preserving them actually bring about. This is what the passage is overall about. This passage is 511 words long, slightly longer than the average CAT passage length, but not very long per se. It is an academic discourse. So we know that this was written by a professor of liberal arts, and the author is talking about academically why preserving language is actually important in a very cultural and in a very social sense, why languages should not actually die out. It's a discourse. A discourse means that the author talks about the topic of discussion and what kind of value it can add to certain aspects of human life. That's what a discourse is. This is an academic discourse on smaller native languages. And this has been picked up from an article in the Huffington Post. Again, a very common source from which CAT passages are often picked up from. I would say reading of this passage can take about 2.5 minutes for seasoned readers. Vocabulary is not very difficult, language is not very difficult, but there are a lot of points which the author makes about the same topic of discussion. So every paragraph brings about a new perspective on the topic. So we have to read with utter concentration. It's not like the same point is being dragged on from the beginning till the end. So a lot of things, to smaller things to understand. So that's why reading can take about 2.5 minutes for seasoned readers. For people who don't have as high a reading habit and are not relying on VRC section of the CAT paper to score well in, they can take about 3 minutes, 10 seconds, even 3 minutes, 20 seconds is actually permissible. More than 3.5 minutes, you should not take to read this passage because language, as I said, is pretty straightforward to understand. And overall level of difficulty, I wanted to call it easy, but when I took the perspective of some students and some fellow trainers, they said that you can call it easy to moderate because there are so many points that are being made inside the passage. So we cannot call it an outrightly easy passage because multiple different perspectives and angles the author is looking at the topic from. So this is what we are supposed to take away from the passage after its read. Stay tuned. In the next video, we will be talking about the questions of this exercise and how to solve them. Thank you.